Hey, good afternoon, and want to welcome you to another 6 minutes of Sanity. Today's episode I'm titling based off the phrase of a mental health worker in the Miami-Dade area, quote, "Sir, why did you shoot?" Right now in America, we're having a great deal of difficulty with the issue of police shooting civilians and civilians shooting police officers based on situations such as traffic stops and other law enforcement encounters. I'm kind of sort of in the middle on this one. I don't have any really strong opinions that I want to put across with regards to firearm usage or whether the Second Amendment should be curtailed or whatever have you for individual citizens. But I do want to talk about a couple things that I'm thinking about with regards to encounters between police and the civilian public. First and foremost, you've got municipalities expecting police departments to do their part in the maintenance of law and order. And this has also been brought upon from the federal government on high with an emphasis on quote unquote order. So in many situations, you're finding police departments patrolling in lower socioeconomic areas where drivers of lower socioeconomic levels or minorities are pretty much more common. Top this with information being put across in the media with perceived threats from people who are lower income or perceived as potential perpetrators, robbers, and whatever have you. And these perceptions may have a great detail of racial bias underneath of it. They may have a small amount. But when you find information out in the media and in local newspapers that say this is the best way for you to get a fast response time from the local constabulary when you call 911, such as identifying the fact that the offender or potential perpetrator has a weapon or that they are of a specific threat to the neighborhood, that they're casing out a house or intending to do harm, which are things that most untrained civilians just don't have a clue about, period. Most police departments and constabularies have no recourse but to engage in a faster response time, period. So in a situation when a law enforcement officer has an encounter with a civilian, potential perpetrator, or whatever have you, there is such a thing as called the use of force continuum. This use of force continuum, the goal of the officer is to regain control of the situation as quickly as possible at as low a level as possible while protecting the community around it. And the levels of force or the tactics or techniques used basically vary on the situation or the officer's level of training or their degree of experience out there in the neighborhood or the public that they're dealing with. So this use of force continuum can start as low as just having a police officer presence, non-threatening. Say, a cop's going through a neighborhood in a PD cruiser, just going through a neighborhood. It's pretty much a non-threatening, but you see the officer there and you're thinking twice about any sort of shenanigans that you might engage in. Increase the level of force in the continuum to the police officer, providing to the civilian a calm, non-threatening command, asking for perhaps to see their identification or asking what's up or what are you doing in the neighborhood. And if the person is not willing to be compliant, then they may engage in shorter commands in give me your driver's license, show me your ID, step over here towards the wall, put your hands on the car. In the event that the civilian decides to engage in some sort of physical, resistance to any sort of questioning from the law enforcement officer, there can be the use of grabs, holds, joint locks, punches and kicks by the officer to at least minimize the activity of the civilian or to subdue them. Moving on to less lethal methods such as batons and sprays and the use of the taser. Naturally, the high end of that use of force continuum is the use of lethal force, and in many guidances from the National Institute of Justice says that it should only be used if a suspect poses a serious threat to an officer or another individual in the community. This is where the problem begins. And the problem comes when an incorrect perception from the public, based definitely or inherently upon their bias against a person who they perceived as a person of lower status or perhaps of a physical minority, is called into a police department and basically obviates the law enforcement agency's opportunity to use lower levels of force. To borrow from the psychologist Abraham Maslow, to a boy with a hammer, every problem is a nail. In a lot of the most recent situations, such as traffic stops and encounters out in public, you're talking situations that as a whole should not have begun with higher levels of force, commanding a person to get out of a car or just plain flat out shooting them. So my suspicion is that there's a little bit of inherent bias coming up underneath. And I'm not saying for every law enforcement officer that they are out and outright racist, but pretty much for the public at large, that we need to make sure that when we're calling in information to a law enforcement agency, that we provide clear and uninflated observation of what we perceive as the threat, so that the person that's maybe just out going for a walk or driving down a street doesn't necessarily end up being the recipient of a death sentence. If you have any questions about what I have to say, or you have any comments or requests, please go ahead and send them to me, bowen.mike@yahoo.com.